Afternoon session 12 p.m. Jury present.
The court said, "Please be seated. Remember that you're still under oath."
The witness said, "Yes, Your Honor."
The court said, "You may continue your direct examination."
Mr. Horton said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, when you worked for Gov't, how often, if ever, did Gov't tell you to buy things?
Quite often.
And what things did Gov't tell you to buy?
It could be equipment for his media room, it could be suits, it could be furniture.
Let's talk about the furniture. What's Promemoria?
Promemoria is a furniture brand.
And where is Promemoria based?
They're based in Italy.
When, if at all, did you deal with Promemoria when you worked for Gov't?
All throughout the 2 years I worked there.
And what did Gov't have you do at Promemoria?
Sometimes buy furniture. Their furniture is custom made. So connect with the people from Promemoria to design certain furniture.
And where would that furniture that you bought for Gov't go?
That would go either to the office or to his home.
You said you bought suits. What kind of suits did you buy for Gov't?
Bespoke, tailored suits.
What do you mean by bespoke?
Custom made.
What brand, if any, of suits did you buy for Gov't?
Mainly 2. Bryony was one, and Stefano Ricci was the other.
And what was the process of buying those suits?
So I would get in touch with the manager, for instance, at Bryony, choose some fabrics. Then take them to boss, he would choose the fabrics for his next batch of suits. The tailor would come either to the office or his home, measure him. Then they would make the suit and come back with the delivery.
And how often would that happen during the 2 years you worked for him?
That happened, I would say, twice a year. Once definitely when it was Chinese New Year, and one more time.
How many suits were you buying for Gov't each time?
Ms. Strofa said, "Objection. Mischaracterizes her testimony."
The court said, on his behalf,
How many suits were you buying on Govt's behalf each time?
I would say approximately a dozen.
How much did those suits cost, Ms. Maistrello?
About 10,000 each.
And what did those suits look like?
They had, of course, pants and a jacket. They were, well, in different colors or different fabrics. Depending on the season or depending on what he wanted, they had his name on the interior pocket.
And what name was on the interior pocket?
Miles Kwok.
Ms. Strofa said, "I'm sorry. I didn't hear that."
The witness said, "Miles Kwok."
Ms. Maistrello, what, if anything, did Gov't tell you about cars he owned in China?
He talked a little bit about his cars. He was he liked cars. He was very proud of his fleet of cars in China.
And what, if anything, did Gov't ask you to do with those cars?
Ms. Strofa said, "Objection. Is this all cars, some cars?"
the court said, with his cars in China?
Mr. Horton said, "Yes, Your Honor."
The court said, go ahead.
He had a few favorite cars that he wanted to import to the US.
And what kinds of cars were those?
It was definitely a Lamborghini and a Rolls-Royce.
And what exactly did Gov't ask you to do with the Lamborghini and the Rolls-Royce?
To import them into the US.
And ultimately were you able to do that?
No.
Why not?
Because of import laws on cars.
What year did Gov't ask you to import his Lamborghini?
I think it was 2018.
Ms. Maistrello, what is a hutong?
It's a traditional architectural structure, typical of the capital of China, Beijing, which has a courtyard and then houses surrounding the 3 sides of the courtyard.
What, if anything, did Gov't tell you about his house in Beijing?
He was very proud of it. He showed some photos, mainly of the interior. He showed photos of his artwork. Everything was custom made in the home.
And what did that property in Beijing look like?
Luxury property, like a traditional Beijing home, but a luxury one.
And how many buildings were on that property?
There were like more buildings attached to one another.
And what, if anything, did he tell you about who lived in his house in Beijing?
He and his family.
What was Chateau Ridge?
Chateau Ridge was a property located in Connecticut that he wanted to purchase.
And what, if anything, did you have to do with Chateau Ridge?
Ms. Strofa said, objection as to the form of the question.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
The witness said, can I answer?
The court said yes.
There was a lot of back and forth for that property. I think I started working on it in 2018. Where he first wanted to purchase it, so there were a lot of talks with the owner of the property. We went there several times to check the property itself and all the rooms and all the art that was in the house. Some of it he wanted to keep, some of it he didn't want it or he didn't need it. It was a quite long process.
You said that, we went there a few times. Who was we?
I went there a few times with him. Sometimes other colleagues tagged along.
And who were those other colleagues who went with you to Chateau Ridge?
In several different instances, Yvette came once. I believe Hank also came. These are the people I remember.
What kind of property is Chateau Ridge?
I guess the easiest way to describe it is like a castle. That's what chateau means. So it looks like a French castle. The interior of the rooms are actually based off Versailles in France.
What, if anything, did Gov't tell you about why he was looking to buy Chateau Ridge?
He liked it.
What, if anything, did Gov't tell you he was going to do with the property if he bought it?
He was going to live there.
Did Gov't ultimately buy Chateau Ridge?
No, he did not.
When you were working for Gov't between 2018 and 2020, what house, if any, did he buy?
He ended up buying a property in Connecticut.
Now what did the Connecticut house that Gov't bought look like?
It was a very big house. I would call it a villa or a mansion.
And who, if anyone, lived in the mansion in Connecticut?
He did, with the family.
Ms. Strofa said, I'm sorry. I just continue to have difficulty hearing the witness, Your Honor.
The witness said, I'm sorry. I'm trying, and this is the highest I can get.
The court said, one moment please. Okay, so I'm being told that the volume is at the highest. And so I'm just going to ask you to be very careful about speaking as loudly as you can.
The witness said, I will.
The court said, thank you.
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, who is Chang Gov't?
Boss's son.
And can you please spell Chang Gov't?
Guoqiang.
What other names, if any, does boss's son go by?
Ms. Strofa said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Mileson.
What, if anything, did Gov't tell you about Mileson's interests?
He also had an interest in motors, so cars, motorbikes.
When you say he had an interest in cars and motorbikes, who are you referring to?
His son.
Did there come a time that Gov't asked you to buy something for Mileson?
Yes.
What did Gov't ask you to buy for Mileson?
It was a motorbike.
Ms. Maistrello, when Gov't told you to buy suits for him or a motorcycle for his son, how would you pay for these things?
It depended on the amount, so it could be either a wire transfer or a check.
And how would you get those checks?
I would ask Yvette.
What would happen when you asked Yvette for a check for a particular purchase?
She would give it to me.
Where did those checks come from?
Golden Spring.
Ms. Maistrello, you said that you bought computer equipment for Gov't. How did he pay for that equipment?
The big bulk of the payments for media and broadcast equipment was paid through Soraka.
What was Soraka?
Soraka was an entity that we used mainly for media and tech-related expenses.
Who was in charge of Soraka?
I don't know.
How would you know whether something should be paid for by Golden Spring or Soraka?
I learned with experience. So I knew that certain expenses would be paid with one company and certain others with another company.
And who did you learn that from?
By working there, or Yvette would tell me, oh, this expense would go under Soraka or under Golden Spring.
And what other companies, if any, paid for some of the things you bought?
There was another entity called Geneva.
What was Geneva?
Ms. Strofa said, objection.
The court said you may answer.
It was an entity that was used mainly for personal purchases or for personal expenses that related to the sherry.
And whose personal expenses was Geneva used to pay for?
Bosses.
Ms. Maistrello, who was in charge of Geneva?
I don't know.
Where was Golden Springs' office located?
When I started working, it was located at 800 Fifth Avenue.
And where is Soraka's office located?
So the official address, I don't know, but it was operating from the same office, so 800 Fifth Avenue.
And what do you mean by official address?
The one that was, for instance, filed in the official paperwork. I've never seen that.
Who, if anybody, would you speak with to authorize an expense from one of the companies that you've just testified about?
Ms. Strofa said, asked and answered.
The court said you may answer.
So whenever boss used to ask me to buy something, I would, at a certain point I understood where the money should be coming from. And I asked Gov't directly for a certain amount of money from a certain company.
Who was Max Krasner?
Max was my colleague at Golden Spring.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, can you please pull up for the witness what's been marked as Government Exhibit SM62? Ms. Maistrello, what is this?
It's a document.
And what is this document?
It's a payment request form.
Is your name on this form?
Yes.
And what does this form indicate?
Being a payment request form. It looks like a purchase was made or it was about to be made and I requested it.
Mr. Horton said, Your Honor, government would offer Government Exhibit SM62.
The court said, no objection.
Ms. Strofa said, none, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit SM62 received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, could you please publish it, Ms. Loftus? Ms. Loftus. Can you zoom in on the line that says approved by Max Krasner?
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, what did Max Krasner do for for Mr. Gov't?
He was an employee of Golden Spring and he worked in accounting.
And what did his job entail?
A lot of payments. I know he was working on tax forms.
And how often, if ever, did you interact with Max Krasner at work?
Every day.
And what would you go to him about?
Well, we were very close in the office, meaning that we worked together. But whenever I needed something, I needed a payment to be done, for instance, by Soraka, I would go to him.
Who was Max Krasner's boss?
Gov't.
Who else, if anybody, did Max report to?
Yvette.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, can you please go to the top of this page that we're on and highlight what's up top there? Ms. Maistrello, can you describe what's at the very top of your payment request form?
Do you want me to read, like, the title?
If you could just describe what we're seeing at the very top of this page.
Okay. So there is the company name at the top and then there is a payment request form. And then there are a few lines that indicate the payee for this payment. The street and address and the form of payment, with the amount of the payment and the purpose of the expense.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, can you please take the exhibit down and show the witness what's marked as Government Exhibit 110? Ms. Maistrello, who's this?
This is Max.
Mr. Horton said, Government offers Government Exhibit 110.
Ms. Strofa said, we have no objection, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit 110 received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, please publish it.
By Mr. Horton.
Now which of Gov's companies did Max work with?
Golden Spring and Soraka, mainly.
In the 2 years you worked for Gov't, how much, if ever, were you with Gov't and Max at the same time?
Definitely a few times a week.
And when, if ever, did Gov't tell Max to buy things?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. When, if ever, did Gov't tell Max to buy things?
It happened if Max was around him. It usually happened when boss had an idea and he wanted to buy something. Then he would ask the person he had in front in that very moment.
And who, if anybody, would Max need to go to after that for permission?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection as to personal knowledge.
The court said, if you know you may answer.
Yvette.
Mr. Horton said, okay. Thank you, Ms. Loftus. You can take this down. Ms. Maistrello, who is Defeng Chow?
He was a colleague for the first few months while I was at Golden Spring.
And what did Defeng Chow do?
He would do security work.
Who else, if anybody, did security work?
I would say that we had two separate teams, so we had Chinese team and we had an American team.
And how often, if at all, did you speak with the people on these security teams?
Every day.
What exactly did the security teams do?
They were doing a little bit of everything, so from driving, handiwork, assembling, disassembling furniture, receiving packages, these things.
What kind of security work did these teams do?
Not much, really, in the sense that there was no need for security, like for bodyguard in this true sense of the term.
And why do you say that there was no need for security?
I believe that there was no danger or threat posed to boss.
In the 2 years working for Gov't, what makes you say that?
Nothing has ever happened in terms of security.
How did you know what those teams were doing all day?
They were telling me.
What was your understanding, if any, about why they were called security teams?
I assumed that the word.
Ms. Schrofa said, objection to what she assumed.
The court said, sustained.
Do you have an understanding of why they were called security teams?
Yes.
What is that understanding?
The term security team, or bodyguard is better than handyman.
What do you mean it's better?
Well, it definitely sounds better when you need to hire someone.
And who, if anybody, withdrawn? Turning specifically to Defeng Chow. What kinds of assignments did Gov't give him?
So at the very beginning, when we were still setting up the office, there was a lot of furniture moving. He was taking furniture from several storage places to the office. He was sometimes painting the office too.
And how long had Defeng Chow worked for Gov't?
I don't know the number of years.
And what, if anything, did you understand about how Defeng Chow came to work for Gov't?
From China.
And what, if anything, do you understand about Defeng Chow's relationship with Govt's family?
They were in good terms.
Mr. Horton said, and Ms. Loftus, if you could please show the witness what's marked as Government Exhibit UK 728. Who is this a photograph of?
There are 3 people in the photo. Boss is one, his wife is the other, and Cow is the other.
Mr. Horton said, Your Honor, government moves to admit Government Exhibit GX UK, pardon me.
Ms. Schrofa said, Your Honor, we have the same objection as before. And I believe that the 403 analysis here would be higher.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit UK 728 received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, and it's 728, just so it's clear. Could you please publish it, Ms. Loftus?
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, who is the person kneeling in the photo?
That's Ho.
And is the name you said the same as Defeng Chow?
Yes.
And who are the 2 people in the right of the photograph?
The man is boss and the woman is his wife.
And what, if anything, was Defeng Chow's relationship with Govt's daughter?
They were together.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, actually, please leave it up. What understanding, if any, did you have about why Gov't hired those security teams?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection. It's not based on personal knowledge, Your Honor. Also, may we approach?
The court said yes.
At the sidebar.
The court said, I suppose that it's the government's contention that they did not work in a traditional security role because Mr. Gov't did not indeed fear that he was in any kind of danger. Is that your contention?
Mr. Horton said, we're trying to elicit, so she worked with Mr. Gov't 7 days a week for 2 years. She also spoke often with the people who were on these so-called security teams. I'd like to ask, I did ask if she understood why they were there. And I think the different question is, did she understand, speaking almost every day with Mr. Gov't, why he had hired them? Particularly when their tasks were different than what the label might suggest if people were hearing this for the first time.
The court said, "You asked a question like that before."
Mr. Horton said, "So, Your Honor, I did ask if she knew why they were there. Sort of what was her understanding from interacting with them almost every day for 2 years. And a lot of the questions in this testimony are about what Mr. Gov't told her, right? She was working by his side almost all week, almost all day for 2 years. I think it's relevant. If he said anything to her why he had these teams, for the jury to know why he told her that."
The court said, "I agree it could come in. I just thought it might have already been asked."
Ms. Schrofa said, "Many times."
Mr. Horton said, "Well, with respect, I do think I was asking a different question, which was from her own observations. Setting aside what anybody told her, what did she see them doing? And now I'd like to elicit, did he ever tell you why he hired them?"
The court said, "Okay, that's fine."
Ms. Schrofa said, "Your Honor, the security team was not hired after she took the job. The security team was in place for years before that. And there's no evidence that she's the one who had anything to do with them being hired. It's also very amorphous to say a security team. There's no indication of who."
Mr. Horton said, "I didn't mean any disrespect to Ms. Schroff. I was just trying to."
The court said, "Go ahead."
Ms. Schrofa said, "Of who she's referring to." Thirdly, Your Honor, what Mr. Gov't said to her about why they hired a specific person would be also irrelevant. It's not in furtherance of any conspiracy, so I don't know how it could even fall under a hearsay exception. But most important, Your Honor, this is cumulative. It is in fact not quite relevant to any issues here. And if he's trying to make the point that this was all a big farce, I believe the point has been made. I just have to add one thing, Your Honor. I'm completely deaf in my left ear. I'm not only having trouble hearing her, I'm also having trouble hearing him, even though he's standing right next to me. So if you could please ask him to use the microphone, I would really appreciate it."
The court said, "Of course. Speak into the microphone. I have checked with the AV."
Ms. Schrofa said, "I know. It's my problem. I can hear fine from here. It's this part."
Mr. Horton said, "I'll do my best to keep it up."
The court said, "I will ask if there's any way of amplifying the sound going beyond the equipment that we already have."
Ms. Schrofa said, "I understand, Your Honor. I know you've tried. I didn't want you to think, I want you to understand why I'm having trouble."
The court said, "I will continue to try, but I will permit the question. The objection is overruled."
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said, "So in order to better hear you, I'd like to try the handheld microphone and see how that works. You may continue."
Mr. Horton said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, what, if anything, did Gov't tell you about why he hired these security teams?
What he said is that it was for security purposes.
Turning to the exhibit in front of you, can you, looking at the exhibit that's in front of you? Ms. Maistrello, you identified the person on the right as Govt's wife. What is her name?
I don't remember it right now.
And can you please spell Defeng Chao?
DEFENG,
What was Govt's relationship like with Defeng Chao?
It was good.
And what sorts of assignments did you see Gov't give to Defeng Chao?
Again, at the very beginning, it was really about setting up the office. So there was a lot of storage moving, furniture moving, assembling, painting.
And you said that there were Chinese team and American team. What differences, if any, were there between the work they did?
The Chinese team was in a way more trusted and closer to boss than the American one. The American teams were also coming and going.
And you said the Chinese teams were closer and more trusted. What did that mean?
So there were things that maybe boss didn't feel comfortable sharing with the American team. Or he wanted to go somewhere he didn't want people to know, so he would definitely
Ms. Strofa said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "Overruled. You may continue."
So he would definitely ask the Chinese team to help him with those.
Mr. Horton said, "Ms. Loftus, you can please take the exhibit down." Ms. Maistrello, who is William J.E.?
William J.E. was boss's friend and finance person.
And what does finance person mean?
He was the person who would handle the investments and financing for boss.
When, if ever, did you meet William J.E.?
Several times over the course of 2 years.
And where did you meet him?
Mainly at the office.
And when, if ever, did you sit in meetings with William J.E.?
Several times during both 2018 and 2019.
And what were the topics of those meetings?
So in 2018, the main topics were Gov't and also rule of law, so rule of law society and foundation. In 2019, it was mainly the same thing.
What was Gov't?
Gov't was a platform, a social media platform that boss started to broadcast for his broadcasts.
During your 2 years working for Gov't, when, if ever, did you work on Gov't?
All along in one capacity or another.
We'll come back to that. What other names, if any, do you know William J.E. by?
Only his Chinese or Cantonese name.
What is his Cantonese name?
Kinming J.E.
Could you please spell that?
Kinming-Ge.
Mr. Horton said, "Ms. Loftus, for Ms. Maistrello only, can you please display GXUK 764? Ms. Maistrello, who is in this photograph?
It's William.
Mr. Horton said, "Thank you, Ms. Loftus. You can take that down." And Ms. Loftus, can you please display what's been marked as GX 103? Who is in this photograph?
It's William.
Mr. Horton said, "Government would offer Government Exhibit 103, Your Honor."
Ms. Strofa said, "No objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "It is admitted."
Government's Exhibit 103 received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, "Please publish it, Ms. Loftus."
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, did there come a time that William J.E. asked you to take a position with another company?
Yes.
And what exactly did William J.E. ask you to do?
He asked me to sit on the board of directors of one of his companies.
What was that company called?
ACA Capital.
Where were you when William J.E. asked you to sit on the board of ACA Capital?
I was at the office.
And what, if anything, did William J.E. say about why he was asking you to sit on the board of ACA Capital?
He mentioned.
Ms. Strofa said, "Objection as to hearsay."
The court said, "If he gave you an explanation, you may answer."
He told me that they were looking for investments in New York and in the US. That was the reason.
And what experience, if any, had you had with investments?
None.
What experience, if any, had you had serving as a corporate director?
None.
Who introduced you to William J.E. before he asked you to sit as a director at that company?
We were introduced by boss.
Did you agree to serve as a director of ACA Capital?
Yes.
And why did you agree to take that position at ACA Capital?
I trusted William. He was asking for it, and I saw no reason to decline.
Why did you trust him?
I trusted him as I trusted boss. He was an extremely kind person, in my opinion, trustworthy.
For about how long did you serve as a director of ACA Capital?
A few months.
And what is ACA Capital?
I don't know.
What work, if any, did you do at ACA Capital?
I didn't do anything.
Did there come a time, Ms. Maistrello, that you had to sit for a deposition in your role as a director at ACA Capital?
Yes, I sat at a deposition, but I had already resigned.
And what is a deposition?
A deposition is a legal procedure where an individual offers sworn evidence.
How did you find out you were going to have to sit for a deposition as a director at ACA Capital?
I was subpoenaed.
And after you were subpoenaed, what did you do?
The next day, I went to the office and I asked our counsel to explain what it was.
Continued on next page. By Mr. Horton.
And what was the name of the person you asked for an explanation?
Daniel Podhasky.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, can you please display for the witness what has been marked as Government Exhibit 105? Ms. Maistrello, who's in this photograph?
That's Daniel.
Mr. Horton said, the government offers Government Exhibit 105.
Ms. Schrofa said, no objection, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit 105 received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, would you please publish it, Ms. Loftus? Ms. Maistrello, what did you do after you took the subpoena to Dan Podhasky?
I told Yvette.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, you can please take the exhibit down. And how did Yvette respond when you told her about the subpoena?
We never spoke about the subpoena itself, but she arranged counsel for me.
And when, if ever, did you meet with those lawyers?
I believe it was July.
Ms. Maistrello, when you met with those lawyers that Yvette arranged for you, had you ever seen them before?
Yes.
And where had you seen them?
At our office.
And what understanding, if any, do you have about why you had seen them before at your office?
They came to the office several times for other lawsuits.
On the day of your deposition, who accompanied you?
Yvette did.
What kind of room was your deposition in?
It was a meeting room.
And where were you sitting?
So there was a long table, and I was sitting almost in the middle.
The court said, one moment please. You may continue.
Mr. Horton said, thank you, Your Honor. Was Yvette the only person who accompanied you to the deposition?
Yes.
Ms. Maistrello, was Yvette there as your lawyer?
No.
Was there a lawyer there to represent you at the deposition?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes, the lawyer was already there at the office.
I see. And where with respect to you was Yvette sitting during your deposition?
2 seats to my right.
Where did you go after the deposition ended?
We went and had lunch.
And where did you go after lunch?
Back to the office.
Who did you have lunch with, by the way?
With Yvette.
And what happened when you got back to the office with Yvette?
We went to Boss's office and talked to him.
And what did you and Yvette talk to Boss about after your deposition?
Yvette told Boss how it went.
How did you think it went?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection as to relevance.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
It was my first deposition, so I didn't really have an idea of how it went.
What did Yvette say to Boss about how it went?
She said it went really well.
And what, if anything, did Yvette say to you in that meeting with Gov't about how your deposition went?
She said I was very good. I did good.
What, if anything, did Yvette call you in that meeting?
She referred to me as a person who, does the right thing or does things the right way.
What language did she say that in?
In Chinese.
And what is the translation in English of what she called you?
The literal translation would be like a little flute or something along those lines.
By the way, Ms. Maistrello, in your 2 years working for Gov't, what language did you speak with him?
In Chinese.
The court said, do you mean Mandarin?
The witness said, yes.
Ms. Maistrello, what month and year was your deposition for ACA Capital?
July of 2019.
You said you were no longer director at ACA Capital. How did you leave your director position at ACA Capital?
I sent an email to William telling him that I would like to resign.
And why did you want to resign from ACA Capital?
I wasn't doing anything for the company. I had overheard that there were, some sort of legal troubles. And not knowing the company and not knowing the role I had in the company, I just didn't want to be involved in any of it.
Ms. Maistrello, as you sit here today, what's your understanding of what the purpose was of your deposition in 2019?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection to what her understanding is today. It's not relevant, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I don't have an understanding of that deposition.
Ms. Maistrello, turning back to the rule of law organizations. When did you first hear that Gov't was starting the rule of law organizations?
That was in the summer of 2018.
How long had you been working for Gov't at that point?
Several months.
When you first heard that Gov't was starting the rule of law organizations, what did you think about it?
I was really, really happy.
Why were you really happy?
Those two organizations were a step further in what boss wanted. And I felt that at that point we could really put things from theory into practice.
What, if anything, did you donate to the rule of law organizations?
I donated $500.
And why did you donate?
I believed in the organizations. I was president of one of them, so if I don't donate, who would? Who does?
And what year did you donate?
It was either 2018 or early 2019.
Did the rule of law organizations have boards of directors?
Yes.
And what role, if any, did you have on the board of directors?
I was a member.
Who else served on that board with you?
So on the board of Rule of Law Society, we had Steve Bannon, who was chair, initially, Sasha Gong, Bill Gov't, and Jennifer Mercurio.
Who was Steve Bannon?
Steve Bannon was the former political advisor of former President Donald Trump.
And how did Steve Bannon get involved with the rule of law organization?
He was very much involved in all the work at the office around 2018.
Who got Mr. Bannon involved with the work around the office?
Boss did.
And what exactly did Mr. Bannon do around the office?
Whenever he was at the office, he was there for meetings with boss.
What kind of meetings?
So initially in 2018, there was a lot of planning around the rule of law organizations. Later on it was more strategic meetings about CCP and China-US-China relations.
What exactly did Steve Bannon do with the rule of law organizations?
He didn't really do anything.
What, if anything, was Mr. Bannon paid for the work he was doing at the office?
Ms. Strofa said. Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence.
The court said. Overruled. You may answer.
He was paid over $1 million divided in 4 installments.
Where did you learn that?
I was at the office.
How was Mr. Bannon paid that money?
Via check.
Where did those checks come from?
I don't remember the entity they came from. It might have been Soraka.
Who decided that Mr. Bannon would get paid that money?
I don't know.
Ms. Maistrello, what role, if any, did you have in planning the launch of the rule of law organizations?
There was a lot of planning that year, so we launched in November of 2018. We had a pretty big press conference on November 21st of 2018. So there was a lot of coordination for people to come into New York City for the conference. Presentations for the keynote speakers, just a few months really of organizing.
When did that planning begin?
Late September 2018.
When was the press conference you just referenced? When did that take place?
November 21st of 2018.
During that planning phase, what, if anything, did Gov't say about how the rule of law organizations would be funded?
He said that he would be.
Ms. Strofa said, Your Honor, are we referring to private conversations between the two of them? It's an open-ended question.
The court said, what time? When?
Mr. Horton said, well, Ms. Maistrello testified that there was a planning phase for some period of months before the launch. And that she participated in it, and that Mr. Gov't did too, Mr. Bannon did too. I was asking her about conversations in that planning phase between the 3 people.
Ms. Strofa said, all of them over all these months.
Mr. Horton said, sounded like it was 1 or 2 months.
The court said, you may answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. During the planning phase, planning for the rule of law organizations, what, if anything, did Mr. Gov't say about how the rule of law organizations would be funded?
So he said that he would donate the first $100 million as a first donor or as a sponsor.
Ms. Maistrello, as president and treasurer of the Rule of Law Society, Did Mr. Gov't ultimately make $100 million donation?
No.
And how was rule of law actually funded?
It was funded through donations that were coming from followers.
What do you mean by followers?
So Boss had a pretty huge following base. And those followers donated starting from 2018.
Did there come a time that Rule of Law broadcast a fundraiser?
Yes, that was the 1-year anniversary.
And where were you during that broadcast fundraiser?
At the office.
Where was the fundraiser broadcast?
When or where?
I'm sorry, where was the fundraiser broadcast?
At the office.
And on what outlet, if any, was the fundraiser broadcast?
On Gov't Media.
What was GTV?
GTV was a platform for I'm sorry. I'm thinking about something else. When I was there, GTV and Gov't Media were actually the same thing.
And what, if anything, did the G in GTV stand for?
Gov't.
The court said, when you refer to the office, what location?
The witness said, so the first office we were at in 2018 and early 2019 was 800 Fifth Avenue. Well, in 2019 we moved to 64th and Lex.
Ms. Maistrello, what, if anything, did you do to plan the fundraiser?
Nothing.
And were you present when the fundraiser was being broadcast?
I was.
What, if anything, was Mr. Govt's role in the fundraiser?
He was broadcasting over the course of several hours.
And who were you with when you were at the fundraiser?
Initially, at the office I was on the 2nd floor. And then so with a couple of colleagues. And then I moved to the 1st floor, where the actual broadcast was happening.
Which colleagues were you with?
I was with Melissa, Max, and Yvette.
And what, if anything, were you asked to do during the Rule of Law fundraiser on Gov't Media?
So we were asked to transfer money from one company or one entity to the other so that we could take screenshots of these money movements and broadcast them live on TV.
And what companies were you asked to move money from during the Rule of Law telecast?
It was mainly Soraka and Golden Spring.
Who asked you to move money from Soraka and Golden Springs accounts during the Rule of Law fundraiser?
Yvette did.
What, if anything, did Yvette say was the purpose of moving money from Soraka and Golden Springs accounts during the Rule of Law fundraiser?
So the final purpose was to have these big amounts of money shown on screen so that people would see that others were donating. And we were able to solicit more money this way.
Where did the Soraka and Golden Spring money that you were asked to move that day come from?
I don't know.
And where were you asked to transfer the Soraka and Golden Spring money during the Rule of Law fundraiser?
At the office.
I'm sorry. Where were you asked to transfer those funds, from Soraka and Golden Spring to where?
Oh, sorry. To Rule of Law.
What was your reaction to the request from Yvette to move the Soraka and Golden Spring money during the fundraiser?
I didn't want to do it.
Why didn't you want to do it?
Because those transfers were not real, those were internal transfers. It was not real money coming in, so I didn't agree with that.
And what was Yvette's response when you told her that you didn't agree with moving that money during the fundraiser?
She saw that I was upset. And she told me that, okay, don't do it, somebody else is going to do it.
Did somebody else do it?
Yes.
And who was that?
Melissa and Max were doing it.
You said earlier that Rule of Law ultimately did nothing to help people in China. What happened when the Rule of Law board met?
We only met once as a board meeting in January of 2020. And in that occasion, we discussed things to do or to be done. But prior to that, we never really sat down as board members.
Other than that in-person meeting, how often would you communicate with other Rule of Law board members?
Not too often.
What, if anything, did the board vote on?
Nothing really.
Did there ever come a time that you cast a vote as a board member in Rule of Law?
Yes.
What was Mr. Govt's title at Rule of Law?
He was sponsor.
And what position did he have, if any, on the Rule of Law board?
He didn't have any.
Who was in charge of the Rule of Law board?
Boss was.
You said there came a time that you cast a vote as a board member. What was the subject of that vote?
It was in 2020. So after COVID hit, there was like a proposal to purchase PPE and ship it to China.
You said there was a proposal to purchase PPE. What is PPE?
In this very case it was masks.
What kind of masks?
N95 masks for COVID masks.
Whose proposal was it for rule of law to purchase N95 masks?
Bosses.
And where in that proposal were the masks? What was to be done with the masks in that proposal?
So they were to be shipped to China.
How did you vote in that proposal?
I voted no.
And, Ms. Maistrello, after you voted no on Mr. Gw's proposal for rule of law to ship N95 masks to China, what happened next?
Our paralegal came.
Ms. Strofa said, "Objection."
The court said, "Overruled. You may answer."
Ms. Strofa said, "Your Honor, the government is eliciting hearsay. We have an objection."
The court said, "If you'll step up, please."
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
The court said, "So I need a ruling that co-conspirator hearsay could come in. Isn't that what you're asking for?"
Mr. Horton said, "It comes in under that exception, Your Honor. It comes in under the agency exception. She's testifying about official business, the rule of law organizations. Paralegal is a classic agent."
Ms. Strofa said, "The paralegal is in a conspiracy with this witness and with Miles Gw't to send PPE masks to China without having established how that falls within the scope of this conspiracy. The statement they want to elicit is the paralegal asking this lady if it was, in fact, a mistake that the masks are being in China. Through that statement they want the jury to conclude, of course, that there would be no reason to send these masks to China. How the paralegal becomes a participant in this conspiracy is unclear to me. Nor is it clear to me how this person becomes a member of that conspiracy."
The court said, "I don't know that they're holding her out as a co-conspirator. Go ahead."
Mr. Horton said, "Would just say set aside the co-conspirator exception for one moment. Paralegal is an agent of the organization. The paralegal is also asking a question. A question is not hearsay. It's not a substantive statement. It's black letter that a question is not offered for its truth, so it's not hearsay. Setting that aside, this fills in the context of testimony that's already been elicited that there was a proposal to a specific thing by a specific person. And there was a vote on that proposal. This detail is about what happened at the conclusion of that vote and it completes the story."
Ms. Strofa said, "Completing the story does not help the argument that it is hearsay. She is not an agent of Mr. Gwa. It should be very clear. She is an employee of Rule of Law Foundation. They have, in fact, established that he had no position at Rule of Law. She's testifying as an agent of the Rule of Law Foundation. And therefore, if they want to bring this out when Rule of Law is part of a criminal action, then her statement would fall within a hearsay exception. Here, it would not."
Mr. Horton said, "Rule of law is in the indictment. Second thing is that it's true that the witness testified that Mr. Gwa had a title at Rule of Law. It's also true that she testified that despite that, he controlled it."
Ms. Strofa said, "She is not an agent of."
The court said, "Here's my ruling. The objection is overruled."
Continued on next page. In open court. By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, you said that Mr. Gwa did not have a title at the Rule of Law Foundation?
Ms. Strofa said, "I believe she's asked and answered that question several times, Your Honor."
The court said, "We've already established that. Move forward, please."
Did Mr. Gwa have a title at Soraka?
No.
Did Mr. Gwa have a title at Golden Spring?
No.
Why not?
Ms. Strofa said, "Objection."
The court said, "Overruled. You may answer."
I don't know.
Did Mr. Gwa have withdrawn? Turning back to your vote against the proposal to send the N95 masks to China. You said that after you voted no, a paralegal asked you a question. What was the question that the paralegal asked you?
She asked me whether it was a typo.
How did rule of law pay for those N95 masks that were sent to China?
With the money from rule of law.
Where did that money come from?
From donations.
Ms. Maistrello, when else, if ever, did rule of law buy N95 masks with donor funds?
In 2020, so when COVID hit.
And what did rule of law do with those other N95 masks that it bought with donor funds?
So part of it went to boss's house, we kept a couple of boxes at the office. And another part of it was distributed to NYPD precincts around the city.
Why did you vote against the proposal to send N95 masks to China with donor money?
Well, because N95 masks were manufactured and produced in China. So it didn't make any sense to me that we bought them from China and then we would ship them back to China.
And you said that masks were also sent to Mr. Gw's home. Which home was that?
To the one in Connecticut.
And when were those masks sent to Mr. Gw's home?
Around March of 2020.
Who made the decision to use rule of law donor money to send those N95 masks to Mr. Gw's home?
Boss did.
You said that rule of law donor money was also used to send masks to the NYPD. What role, if any, did you have in sending those masks to the NYPD?
I was asked by a vet to draft a letter to accompany those masks. The letter should have read something along the lines of, "This is a gift from Miles Kwok."
And what did you do when you were asked to write a letter saying that those masks were a gift from Miles Kwok?
I told her that I could write the letter, but that I wouldn't sign it with the name of with boss's name.
And why wouldn't you sign it with Mr. Gw's name?
Well, because it was not discussed with the other members of the board and it was not a direct gift from him. But it was those masks were paid with rule of law money.
And what, if anything, did Yvette say when you said you wouldn't write a letter that said those masks came from Miles Gwa?
She told me that I was being paid to execute orders and not to think.
How much were you paid a year when you worked for Mr. Gwa?
60.
What amount, if any, was listed as your salary on your offer letter?
That was 90.
And what, if anything, explains the difference there?
I was told by a vet that the company preferred to pay a lower salary on a monthly basis and a higher bonus at the end of the year. That it would top it up.
Including your bonus, what was your total pay at the end of the year?
I believe my bonus on January of 2019 was 5,000.
And including that amount, how much did you make in a year working for Mr. Gwa?
65.
Mr. Horton said, "May I have one moment, Your Honor?"
The court said yes.
Counsel conferred.
Mr. Horton said, "Thank you, Your Honor." Ms. Maistrello, in your 2 years working for him, what, if anything, did Mr. Gwa tell you about his lifestyle in China?
In China, he had a lot of connections. He knew a lot of people. When he talked about China, he was very proud of his achievements. He would often talk about his hotel. He would talk about the staff there. He would talk about the design, how he designed it. He was generally very proud of it.
And what did you understand Mr. Gwa to mean when he told you about his connections in China?
When he talked about his connections in China, he knew a lot of people. And so he would sometimes talk about what these people did. He knew a lot about them.
And who were these people?
All sorts of people really. Business people, ministers. He knew a lot of people.
And what do you mean by minister?
So government ministers. It could be the Minister of the Interior, Minister for Development, for Education, various ministries.
You said he talked to you about his hotel in China. What did he tell you about it?
He described the hotel, the interior, the exterior. He talked about his staff there, how things were run. He was generally very, very proud of it.
And what, if anything, did he tell you about the status of the hotel during the time you were working with him?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. What, if anything, did Mr. Gwa tell you about the status of his hotel in China during the time you were working with him?
The status of the hotel while he was in the US?
Yes.
The hotel was still running.
What, if anything, did Mr. Gov't tell you about when he came to the United States?
Well, before coming to the United States, he went to Hong Kong, so he was there first.
And what, if anything, did he tell you about when he came from Hong Kong to the United States?
He left Hong Kong in 2015 and he relocated to New York.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Gov't tell you he was doing in the period between when he got to New York in 2015 and when you started working for him a few years later?
What he said is that he was preparing or getting ready for his fight against the Chinese government.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Gov't tell you that getting ready meant? What did that entail?
Mainly, he broadcast. That's what he did.
And what, if anything, Ms. Maistrello, did you observe about how Mr. Govt's lifestyle changed in the United States?
Ms. Schrofa said, assumes facts not in evidence, Your Honor.
Mr. Horton said, I can lay a foundation for it.
The court said, all right. One moment, please. Go ahead. The objection is sustained.
Mr. Horton said, thank you, Your Honor.
By Mr. Horton.
Ms. Maistrello, other than the broadcasting, what actions, if any, did Mr. Gov't take while you were working for him for that fight against the CCP?
Nothing really, other than putting together people for his fight.
You said that Mr. Gov't asked you to buy things withdrawn. Ms. Maistrello, you said that you donated $500 to the Rule of Law Society. If you could do that again, would you have donated your money to Rule of Law?
With the knowledge I have today, no.
And why not?
Because that money wasn't used for anything that I believed in really.
Mr. Horton said, can I have one moment, Your Honor? I'm sorry, could I have just one moment, Your Honor?
The court said yes, yes.
Mr. Horton said, thank you.
Counsel conferred.
Mr. Horton said, thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
The court said, cross-examination.
Ms. Schrofa said, may I, Your Honor?
The court said you may.
Ms. Schrofa said, thank you. Cross-examination.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Ms. Maistrello, where did you go to college?
College in Rome, Italy.
Okay. And after you studied in Rome, where did you study next?
In China.
And you were in China for almost 5 or more years, correct?
From 2012 to 2017.
And you were working while you were in China, correct?
Yes.
And you were there with your husband, correct?
No.
Did you get married after you left China?
Yes.
And what do you do for a living now?
I work for Google.
I'm sorry?
I work for Google. Google search.
You work for Google?
Yes.
Okay. And your husband is a professor, correct?
That's correct.
And he's a professor at a university in New York, correct?
NYU, yes.
And is it fair to say that when you accepted a job at Golden Springs, part of the reason you were hired is because you spoke Mandarin, correct?
Yes.
Right. And you were first initially hired as a translator, right?
Yes.
And it came a point where there was some unhappiness with your level of translation. So they brought in outside translators to translate for meetings, correct?
No.
Well, you didn't translate at formal meetings, correct?
I did.
I really can't hear you. You did not. The answer is you did not, right?
The answer is I did.
The answer is you did translate for formal meetings, correct? That's your testimony?
Yes.
Who's Una Wilkinson?
She was hired as an external translator in late 2019.
Right. And she was brought in then to translate meetings where other people were present, correct?
Yes.
Right. And you were not used during those meetings for your translation skills, correct?
Correct.
Right. Now, you testified that you were an employee of Golden Springs, New York, right?
Golden Spring, not Springs. But yes.
Okay. Golden Spring, New York, right?
Golden Spring, New York.
And there is an entity called Golden Spring, Hong Kong, correct?
Right.
And Golden Spring, Hong Kong is the entity above Golden Spring, New York, right?
I don't know if it's above.
You don't know if it's above. Are you aware as to where the funds into Golden Spring came from?
No.
Do you know who put money into the Golden Spring, New York account?
Yes.
Who?
Yvette did.
You think Yvette put her personal money into the Golden Spring, New York account?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Not her personal money, no.
Okay. My question was whose money was in Golden Springs, New York?
I don't know.
Okay. And you certainly don't know whose money was in Golden Spring, Hong Kong, correct?
Correct.
And you don't know how many billions of dollars there was in Golden Spring, Hong Kong, correct?
I don't know.
And you don't know how many millions or billions or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
That was in Golden Spring, New York, correct?
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. You do not know how many billions, millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars there was in Golden Spring, New York, correct?
I don't know.
Now, you heard about Mr. Guo when you worked in China, correct?
Yes.
You worked for an oil company, you testified, right?
That's correct.
And did you work there as a translator, or did you work for the oil company, or something else?
No, I was working as something else.
And what was that something else?
I had several titles. I left as Director of Communications.
Director of Communications, correct?
Yes.
And in your job in China, you socialized, correct?
Yes.
You socialized with people who had money, correct?
I socialized with people.
And some of them had money, right?
That I don't know.
Some of them were rich, correct?
I don't know.
Well, you went to parties, did you not?
No.
You didn't go to a single party while you were in China?
What do you mean by party?
A party, a social gathering, an event.
I went to dinners.
Right. And you went to dinners with well-heeled people in your business field, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I went to dinners with my colleagues.
Right. And when you went to dinners with your colleagues, you had work-related dinners with people who were working with you in the oil company, correct?
Yes, colleagues.
Right. And at that time, you had heard of something called Pangu, right?
Yes.
Tell the jury, please, what is Pangu?
Pangu is a building in Beijing, in the capital. It's a dragon-shaped building that was built around the Beijing Olympics in 2008.
It's a huge building, right?
It's quite big.
It's a hotel, right?
Pangu Hotel is a hotel, yes.
7-star hotel, correct?
It is called 7-star hotel. In fact, on the world ranking it's 5.
It's in the world ranking of 5 out of 7. Is that your testimony?
Yes. So the name reads 7-star hotel, but, in fact, due to, I don't know, hotel star ranking, it is a 5-star hotel.
It's a 5-star hotel now. Back then it was a 7-star hotel?
I don't know about now.
Okay. So you know who owned Pangu, right?
When?
When you were living in China, who did you think owned Pangu?
I did not know at that time who owned Pangu.
You did not know that Miles Guo's family owned Pangu?
When I was in China, no.
Your testimony is when you were in China, you were unaware of the owner of the Pangu Hotel?
When I was in China, I knew he was a developer and he developed the Pangu Hotel. But I did not know who the owner was.
Okay. So you at least knew he was the developer, correct?
I knew that, yes.
Right. And you testified on direct, did you not? That there came a time when Mr. Guo showed you pictures of his homes in China, correct?
Yes.
And each home was affluent, correct?
I saw one.
You only saw one home?
I saw yes. Correct.
And it was a humongous property, correct?
I can't say.
It's a traditional Chinese property that has a courtyard, correct?
Yes.
And alongside the courtyard are different homes, correct?
Different structures, yes.
And each structure is for one part of the family, correct?
Traditionally, yes.
And traditionally, that's the culture. Each brother had a home around the courtyard, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer if you know.
Traditionally, so parents live together with the son and the family. And then other family members. if any, would be in the surrounding properties.
Right. And he told you that's how he and his family lived in China, correct?
Yes.
And when he told you that, he was talking nostalgically about his life in China when he lived there, correct?
I wouldn't say nostalgically.
Really? Was it with hatred?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
He was just talking about it.
He was talking about his family, right?
He was talking about his home.
Right. And when he was talking to you about his home, he was in his office, right?
Sometimes in the office, sometimes in his home.
And he was just having a regular employer/employee conversation with you, right?
Yes.
Okay. Your employment, am I correct, was with Golden Spring. Ms. Strofa said, if I could just have her employment contract up, please. Is that correct, ma'am?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. You had an employment contract, did you not, with Golden Spring?
Yes.
Okay. And part of that employment contract, the government showed it to you on direct, right?
Yes.
And it's a one-page contract, is that correct? Ms. Strofa said, it's GXB 871. There you go. Thank you so much. If I could just have you take a look at the document, please. Ms. Strofa said, may I also have it published for the jurors, please? That was the contract, is that right?
This was the offer letter.
Ms. Strofa said, okay. And if you could just scroll down, all the way down. And you signed it, correct?
Yes.
You signed it on February 13th of 2018, correct?
Yes.
And the letter says, of course, that you've reviewed it, you agree to the terms and conditions. And then you signed it, right?
Yes.
I mean, you read it, right?
I did.
Okay. Let's just go back up for a minute, okay? You picked your own start date, I'm assuming. Or you arrived at a start date that was convenient for you, which was February 19th, right?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Your title was to be project assistant and interpreter, remember that?
I can see that, yes.
Right. I didn't ask you whether you saw it, I asked you if you remember that. You remember that's what you were hired for, correct?
I remember that I was hired as an interpreter.
Okay. It says project assistant and interpreter, right?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't scratch out project assistant, right?
I did not.
Okay. And it said clearly that you were going to be employed by Golden Spring New York Limited, right?
Yes.
And then it tells you a couple of bullet points down. The offer letter is for employment at will, correct?
Yes.
And employment at will is explained to you in this document, right?
Yes.
And, in fact, it tells you right there that you are free to terminate your employment with them as you see fit, correct?
Yes.
Doesn't even tell you have to give 2 weeks' notice, correct?
It does not.
Right. You could have walked out of that job any day you felt like, right?
Yes.
Right. You didn't like something that was going on. You could have left, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you met with these prosecutors how many times to prepare for your testimony here?
I don't remember the number of times.
You don't remember the number of times that you met with them?
No.
And do you remember who you met with?
Yes.
Who did you meet with?
Do you want the names?
Sure.
Justin Horton, Ryan Finkel, Juliana Murray, and Micah Fergenson.
And the gentleman who asked you the questions today, he reviewed this document with you to prepare you, right?
He showed me this document.
Well, he didn't just show it to you, right? He went over it with you, right?
He showed it to me.
He didn't review the terms of the document with you?
No.
You were first contacted by the government in August of 2023, remember that?
I do.
And then you were contacted again on August 14th, remember that?
I don't remember the dates.
How about January 16th?
I don't remember the dates.
January 25th?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may continue.
I don't remember the dates.
May 24th?
I don't remember the dates.
May 15th?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may continue.
I don't remember the exact dates.
May 9th?
I don't remember the dates.
May 20th?
I don't remember the dates.
How about yesterday? Do you remember yesterday?
Yesterday I was here.
And you met with them, right?
Yes.
With Mr. Horton sitting right there, the man who asked you questions, right?
Yes.
How many hours?
A few minutes.
Okay. How about the day before?
On Monday.
I'm sorry?
Are you referring to Monday?
Am I referring to me?
Monday. Are you referring to Monday?
Yes.
We met on Monday.
You met on Monday, right? Monday was a federal holiday?
It was.
Right. Where did you meet?
We met at 26 Fed.
They picked you up at the train station?
No.
Okay. You got to 26 Federal Plaza and you sat down and met with them, right?
Correct.
They went over your testimony?
No.
No? They didn't tell you what questions they were going to ask you?
They asked me some questions.
Right. They went through a whole series of questions, just like they did in court today, right?
Not exactly.
Well, no, not exactly. But they sat down and asked you a whole bunch of questions, right?
They asked me questions.
Right. And then they took notes, right?
They did.
They showed you photographs, right?
They showed me some photographs, yes.
They showed you the same photographs here today, correct?
I don't remember exactly.
And did they then tell you how somebody like me would cross-examine you?
They explained how it works, yes.
They did, right? They told you what questions would come at you on cross-examination, correct?
No.
They didn't tell you what questions would come, what you should anticipate at cross.
They explained to me how it works.
Right. They told you that a lawyer for Mr. Gov't would ask you questions, right?
Yes.
And they helped you prepare on how to answer, right?
No.
Ms. Strofa said, okay, let's see if we can pull up Government Exhibit 141. They showed you this photograph, did they?
One time they did.
Right. I won't ask you which one of the many preps they showed you the photograph in. But they showed you this photograph, right?
Yes.
And this photograph was taken by whom, ma'am?
We had about 7, between photographers and videographers, for a photo shoot.
Right. And you were not the only person in the photo shoot, right?
No.
There were other people in the photo shoot, right?
Yes.
And it was a professional agency that took the photos, right?
Yes.
And the photos they were going to be used for a particular launch, correct?
Correct.
And this was not unusual, right?
A photo shoot only happened once, in fact.
It's only happened once while you were working there, right?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. It only happened once, as far as you know, during the time you were working there, right?
During the time I was working there, it happened once.
Right. And you worked there, all told, how much? About 2 years?
More than 2 years.
How many more? 2.5 years?
Approximately.
Approximately 2.5 years. And it's fair to say, right, you correct me if I'm wrong. You left because of medical reasons, right?
That is correct.
Right. And you decided COVID was coming and you did not feel well, right?
No.
Well, COVID was coming, right, when you quit?
COVID hit in February of 2020.
Right. You think COVID hit in February of 2020 or March of 2020?
It was either February or March.
And you quit the month after, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason you gave for quitting is because you thought microwaves had attacked you, right? That's what you told someone at Golden Springs?
No.
Okay. And you then stated that you had been hospitalized. Is that correct?
I was about to be.
Right. And Yvette responded to you being sick, correct?
What do you mean by that?
She sent you flowers, did she?
No, she did not.
She did not. And did she extend your insurance coverage to help you while you were sick?
No, she did not.
She did not provide you with COBRA benefits while you were sick?
COBRA benefits were included, but she did not extend those personally.
She did not offer to you to extend them personally. Is that your testimony here today?
Correct.
Okay. And you were in touch, were you not, with other people who worked for Mr. Gov't, correct?
When?
Throughout your time after you quit working at Golden Springs, right?
A few people reached out to me.
Right. And they reached out to you making sure you were well, right?
They asked me how I was doing.
Right. And included in that list is Melissa, correct?
Yes.
Continued on next page. By Ms. Schrofa.
A lawyer named Victor Serta said you should get medical help and feel better, correct?
I don't remember that.
Okay. And Max Krasner reached out to you, correct?
Yes, he asked me how I was.
And somebody named Dan Podhasky also reached out to you, correct?
Yes.
Now these are all people that you knew from working there, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you knew. Let's just go through the list. Yvette, is that right?
Yes.
You knew Dan Krasner, correct?
Max.
Max Krasner.
Max Krasner.
Sorry, I mix up names all the time. Max Krasner, correct?
Yes.
Dan Podhasky, correct?
Yes.
You don't like Dan Podhasky, right?
That's not true.
Really? Didn't you complain about him hitting on you one day?
No, I did not.
You did not complain to Yvette Wang that he had hit on you during a trip to Washington, D.C.?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Did you take a trip with Dan Podhasky to Washington, D.C.?
No.
You did not take a trip with Dan Podhasky to Washington, D.C. for business. That's your testimony?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
It's fair to say you didn't like Dan Podhasky, right?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Did you have a positive working relationship with Mr. Podhasky?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Asked and answered.
Ms. Schrofa said, I did not ask that.
The court said, you may answer that.
We had a good working relationship.
I'm sorry?
We had a good working relationship.
What was your working relationship with him?
We were colleagues.
Okay. And as colleagues, how did you interact with each other?
We talked.
Okay. Talked about what?
Work.
What work?
Work at the office.
Work at the office. What work at the office?
He would come to me to ask for something, or whenever he needed a translation, I would help him out. Work-related talk.
And you've testified at great length about your relationship with Yvette, correct?
I didn't testify to great length. I answered questions that I was asked.
Okay. And Yvette's full name is, did you call her Yvette, or did you call her Ms. Wang, or how did you refer to her?
I used her first name.
You called her Yvette, right?
Her Chinese first name.
And was that?
Yangping.
You referred to her as Yanping when you talked to her?
Yes.
Okay. But when you talked to the government about her, you called her Yvette, right?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your interactions with her, okay? You testified that she was the one who conducted the first job interview, right?
Yes.
And when she interviewed with you, where were you located?
The first interview happened at the Plaza Hotel.
Okay. And no reason was given to you as to why the interview was at the Plaza Hotel, correct?
No.
It was an everyday job interview, correct?
It was a job interview.
Right. And you had been sent there by somebody named Steve Weber, right?
Yes.
And Steve Weber is a headhunter, correct?
I don't know if he is today. He was at that time.
Right. And you filled out a job or an application to get a job through his company, and that's what happened, right?
He had reached out to me.
Right. And you testified about the second interview was with Mr. Gov't, correct?
Correct.
Now when you went to that second interview, they didn't send you a memo or a notice saying you have a job interview with boss, right?
I don't remember that.
They told you had a job interview, and the interview was with a person named Mr. Gov't, right?
I don't remember the specific name they used.
So you don't remember if they referred to him as Mr. Kwok, correct?
I don't remember, no.
You don't know if they referred to him as Mr. Gov't, correct?
I don't remember.
Is it fair to say that they did not refer to him as boss when they set up the interview?
I don't remember.
Okay. You sent out emails as part of your job, correct?
Yes.
Internal emails, correct?
Yes.
And external emails, correct?
Yes.
And you sent out external emails to agencies, correct?
What do you mean by agencies?
Businesses, right? You sent out external emails to businesses, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you referred to Mr. Gua as either Mr. Gua or Mr. Kwok in your emails, correct?
No. I would never refer to him as Mr. Kwok.
Well, if you were emailing with that fancy place in Italy about the furniture, how would you refer to him?
Mr. Gua.
Mr. Gua, right? You wouldn't call him boss in your email, right?
I would definitely call him Mr. Gua.
Right. And when you advertised your past job experience at Golden Spring, you don't say, I worked for boss, right? You say, I worked for a man named Miles Gua, correct?
I don't really advertise. I never advertise his name.
How about on LinkedIn? Do you say, I worked for a man named boss?
No.
Okay. So the only time you consistently referred to him as boss is when you're testifying here or when you are talking internally at the office, correct?
So I would call him boss in Chinese when I talked to him directly and boss when I referred to him with my colleagues.
And this courtroom setting is neither you talking to Mr. Gua nor you talking to any of your colleagues, correct?
That's correct.
This is a formal proceeding, correct?
It is.
And you referred to him throughout your testimony as boss, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now if I could have you recall your testimony about Government Exhibit 102, please. This is Yvette, correct?
It is.
Right. And according to you, during your interview with Yvette, Yvette Yanping Wang, asked you what your connection was to CCP, is that right?
Yes.
Right. It's fair to say, right? You cannot be part of the CCP because you are simply not a Chinese national, correct?
That's correct.
You cannot be part of the CCP without being a Chinese national, correct?
That is correct.
And Ms. Wang of all people would most certainly know that basic fact, correct?
Yes.
There is no way Ms. Wang ever asked you during a job interview if you belong to the CCP. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Horton said, Objection, Your Honor.
The court said, I'll let you answer. Go ahead.
She never asked me if I was a party member. She asked me if I knew people who were party members.
She asked you if you knew anyone who was a party member. Is that your testimony?
She asked me if I knew people who were party members.
Did she explain to you what "new" means?
What do you mean new?
Well, I know you now. That doesn't mean I actually know you, right?
Mr. Horton said, Objection, Your Honor.
The court said, Don't testify.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'll move on. Could you show her Government Exhibit 130, please? You testified about this building, correct?
Yes.
This is the Sherry Netherland, right?
It is.
They showed you this photograph during your preparation, correct?
I don't remember.
Okay. Mr. Gua lived on the 18th floor of this building, correct?
Yes.
Penthouse, correct?
Yes.
It's gigantic. Isn't that true?
It's big.
Right. It has a recording studio in there, correct?
What do you mean by recording studio?
A place from where he broadcast, correct?
That was an office.
Right. There was an actual office set up in that home, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you try and keep your voice up? That would really help me out, please.
I'll do my best.
Thank you. And there was security in that building, correct?
The building has staff that lets people in and out.
Right. 24-hour staff that lets people in and out, correct?
Yes.
You couldn't go up to that 18th floor unless somebody in that floor said you could come up, correct?
Yes. My name was on the list.
Exactly. And the only reason you could go up is because your name was on that list, correct?
Yes.
And that was because Mr. Gua wanted to have security for himself and his family, correct?
The security apparatus belongs to the hotel.
And he's the one who puts your name on that security apparatus, correct?
I don't know if he is the one, but my name was there.
Okay. And is it fair to say that there is security apparatus in that building 24/7?
I believe so.
And there's security apparatus in the garage 24/7, correct?
That I don't know.
Okay. And sitting here today, you have no idea, do you? Whether or not he picked that building because he wanted to make sure that he lived in a building with 24-hour security. You simply don't know, correct?
The reasons why he picked that building, he knows.
Exactly. You don't know, right?
I do not.
Ms. Schrofa said, You may take that down. Thank you. If somebody could show her UK 723, please. You testified about this photograph, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's go through them. You see Mr. Gov't seated there, correct?
I do.
And who is to his left?
His wife.
And do you know for how many years she was held in prison because she was married to Mr. Gov't?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained.
Do you see the person seated to her left?
I do.
Who is that?
That's Yvette.
And do you know how many years Yvette was held in prison in China?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained.
And who is the person seated right across from Mr. Gov't?
His daughter.
Okay. And his daughter now lives in the United States, correct?
Until I was working, so in 2020, she was in the United States.
And you knew her from work, right?
She came to the office.
She sent you a Christmas gift each Christmas, right?
She bought Christmas gifts for all of us at the office.
Every employee, correct?
I don't know if every employee got it.
Okay. Mr. Gov't got you gifts, right, while you worked for him?
For Chinese New Year.
Your testimony is that the only gift you got from Mr. Gov't was on Chinese New Year?
Twice. On 2 separate Chinese New Years.
Okay. Do you remember getting a gift of an Hermes puffer jacket?
Yes.
That was from him, right?
Correct.
You accepted the gift, right?
I did.
Where is Hermes, by the way? Where is it located?
The headquarters, you mean?
No. I mean just the store.
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, overruled. If you know where it is, let us know.
On Madison.
Madison and what?
I don't remember the cross street.
67th?
I don't remember.
How much do you think that puffer jacket cost?
I don't know.
You'd agree with me, would you not, ma'am, that Hermes is a very high-end store, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." 401.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. You would agree with me, would you not, that Hermes is an extremely high-end store?
I agree.
Ms. Schrofa said, you may take that down. You testified, did you not, on direct about a store, and forgive me, I don't remember the name. Promemoria, or something like that.
Promemoria? Yes.
Correct. Do you remember that store?
They don't have a store here.
It's a company in Italy, correct?
Correct.
It's a supplier, right? Supplies leather, correct?
It's a furniture company.
And you can call them and get yourself some very expensive furniture, correct?
Anybody can call them, yes.
Right. Right. And you placed several orders with that company, correct?
Yes.
Right. And they were orders for furniture, correct?
Yes.
And you would place the order, correct?
Correct.
Who chose it, the furniture?
Boss did.
Mr. Gov't, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Gov't would choose the furniture and he'd ask you to place the order, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you would place the order, right?
I would.
Sometimes he'd change his mind about the order, right?
All the time.
All the time. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Very frustrating, correct?
It was part of the job.
It was part of the frustrating part of the job for you, right?
It was part of the job.
He would pick something, have you place the order, and then have you cancel it, correct?
That happened.
He would change his mind, correct?
Yes.
He did that with that place, whatever it's called, Chateau Ridge or something, right?
He initially wanted to purchase it and then he didn't.
Right. And you spent a lot of time testifying about, that it was a palace and it had art and it had all of this stuff. End of the day, he never bought it, correct?
He did not.
Now let's talk about the Brioni suits that you ordered for him, according to you. Did you order them for him?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how long he had been a customer of Brioni? Whether it had been for a decade or 2 decades?
Close to 2 decades.
2 decades, right? It's 20 years?
Approximately.
Right. So they knew him, correct?
They did.
Right? Because they'd been doing his suits for 20 years, right?
They knew him.
Okay. Who paid his bills 20 years ago? Do you know?
I do not.
Who paid his bills 10 years ago, do you know?
I do not.
Who paid his bills for the suits now, do you know?
You mean today?
Well, today you certainly don't know because you don't work for him anymore, right?
That's correct.
Right. So when you worked for him, who paid those bills?
Golden Spring.
Golden Spring belonged to whom? Sitting here today, you don't know whose money was Golden Spring, right?
I know the name of the president. I know the name of the chief operating officer.
Okay. You don't know whose money went in there, right?
I do not.
Right. And certainly you were never on the board when Rule of Law Foundation put any money in there. Correct?
What do you mean by that?
You don't know any instance when any money from Rule of Law Foundation went into Golden Spring, correct?
I don't know that money from Rule of Law ever went to Golden Spring. I don't know.
I just wanted to make sure. Now you said that they paid all of this money for his suits. Golden Spring, New York did, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And they paid by what? Check or transfer? Do you know?
It was usually a check.
Okay. But you don't know, right?
I do.
You do know that it was paid by check.
Yes.
Who was the check made out to? Brioni, New York, Brioni, France, where?
Bryony, New York on Madison.
Okay. Now you also testified about cars, correct?
Yes.
This man doesn't know how to drive, right?
He knows how to drive.
You've seen Miles Good drive a car.
Yes.
On the streets of New York.
Just outside of New York.
Outside of New York. Your testimony is you know this man to have driven a car outside on a street.
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Do you know if he has a driver's license?
When I worked there, he did not. He only had a Hong Kong driver's license, yes.
He didn't even have a learner's permit, right?
Do you mean a U.S. learner's permit?
Yes, ma'am.
At that time he did not.
Okay. He was driven to work, correct?
Yes.
He was driven from work, correct?
That's correct.
And he was driven everywhere he went. He never drove a car ever on a New York City street, correct?
He did once.
Okay. Putting aside this once that you keep referring to, he was driven back and forth everywhere he went. Correct, while you worked for him.
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'll move on, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer.
True?
He was driven.
Okay. And you talked about how he was talking about some Rolls-Royce that he had in China, correct?
Yes.
He never got that Rolls-Royce from China to the United States, correct?
Not that I know of.
I'm sorry. What?
Not that I know of.
Exactly. He would talk about it and then he would just abandon the project, correct?
It just wasn't possible to import that car, so.
Right. And same for the Lamborghini, right? No Rolls-Royce or Lamborghini was ever imported here. Correct?
Not to my knowledge.
You could only testify to your knowledge. So the answer is no?
The answer is no.
Okay. Now you also testified about a person named Hank, correct?
Yes.
Now Hank came from China with Mr. Gov't, correct?
That's correct.
Right. And Mr. and Hank speaks absolutely no English, correct?
He does not.
Right. And Hank used to live with Mr. Gov't and his family, correct?
They lived separately.
You think Hank lived separately from the Gov't family?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
You testified about Mr. Govt's son named Mileson, correct?
Yes.
You've never personally met Mileson, correct?
I did.
Where did you meet him?
At the office.
At the office where?
805th.
And what year was that?
The first time I met him was 2018.
And when was the second time you met him?
Can you repeat the question, please?
When was the take your time?
Thank you.
You're welcome. When was the second time?
In 2019.
And you haven't met him since, right?
I believe the last time we met was 2019.
Okay. And he didn't ask you to buy him any motorbikes, right?
Not directly, no.
The question was whether Mileson asked you to buy any motorbike. The answer is no, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Gw't didn't ask you to buy any motorbikes for his son, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, you may answer.
He did.
He asked you to buy motorbikes for his son?
One specific.
I cannot hear you.
One time.
One time. And you never bought the bike, right?
I believe he bought it himself.
I asked you if you bought the bike.
I did not.
Okay. And when you say you believe he bought the bike, you actually do not know if he ever bought a bike for his son, correct? That's just your belief?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer as to whether you know or you believe.
I do not know.
You would ask Yvette for payment, correct? On things that Mr. Gw't wanted you to buy?
For bigger amounts, yes.
And it would be Yvette who would have to authorize the payments, correct?
Yes.
You had no ability to authorize any payment from any entity, correct?
No, I only had a company's credit card.
Right. My question was, you had no ability to authorize payment at all, correct?
Authorize?
Yes.
No.
You could not say, Golden Spring is going to pay this bill, correct?
It depended on the amount.
Your testimony is that if it was a small amount from Golden Spring that was being spent, you could have that paid through Golden Spring?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Mischaracterizes her testimony.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I placed orders through my company's credit card, so for smaller amounts, yes.
You would place the order, correct? Right?
Yes.
The bill would go to Golden Spring, correct?
Yes.
You don't know if it was paid or not, right?
Well, payments go through immediately, through the credit card.
You don't know if it was paid or not, correct?
I'm not.
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, are you asking whether a transaction was consummated or whether the credit card bill was paid?
Ms. Strofa said, whether the credit card bill was paid.
The credit card bill was always paid because I had the money available.
You mean the Golden Spring credit card has the money available?
Yes.
It's not your credit card, right?
My corporate credit card.
Not your credit card, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
Could you buy yourself something off that credit card?
Personal expenses?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Now you've talked about several entities while you were testifying on direct, correct? We've already covered Golden Spring, right? So let's talk about Soraka. Do you have any understanding what Soraka was?
What I knew about Soraka was that all the expenses related to tech or media went to Soraka.
Okay. You don't know if Soraka was a holding company, correct?
I do not.
You don't know if it's a private company, correct?
I don't.
You don't know where it's licensed or incorporated, correct?
I do not.
And then they asked you all these questions about some other company called Geneva, correct?
Geneva?
Sure. Do you remember your testimony about that?
Yes.
Okay. You don't know anything about that company either, right?
Structurally, no.
Correct. You don't know who owns that company, correct?
I do not.
You don't know if there's a board of directors of that company, correct?
I don't.
And you don't know where the money into that company comes from, correct?
I do not.
Only reason you could testify about it is because you talked to the government about it in your preparation. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
It's okay. I'll move on. Now you testified, did you not? That there were times when you accompanied Mr. Gw't and he would decide to purchase something, correct?
Accompany him where?
Well, you two work together, correct?
I did not say that.
Well, didn't you testify on direct that whoever was in front of him would pay, right?
What I said is whenever boss wanted to buy something, it could be a TV, it could be a screen, it could be a monitor, it could be a camera, the person boss had in front of him in that very moment, he would ask them.
Okay. He would ask them to pay, correct?
He would ask them to buy. He wouldn't use the word pay. He would just say buy it.
Right. And 30 minutes later, he may change his mind, correct?
He may.
Okay. And when that happened, Golden Spring would pay, correct?
Well, when he changed his mind, if he changed his mind, maybe there was no need to purchase at all.
Okay, fair enough. Now one of the other people you testified about on direct was a person named Chow, correct?
Oh, cow.
Right. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you testified. Ms. Strofa said, if you could just show her UK 728, please. You testified about this photograph, correct?
I did.
Okay. Do you know when this photograph was taken, by the way?
When?
Yes.
I don't.
Do you know who took it?
I do not.
You didn't take it, right?
I didn't.
So the only way you could testify about this photograph is because they showed it to you during your preparation?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained.
Did you see this photograph ever before the government showed it to you?
No.
No, right? What's the answer?
I've never seen.
Mr. Horton said, "Objection."
The court said, asked and answered. Let's go.
You've never seen it before, right?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
This photograph is taken at Chinese New Year, right?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection."
The court said, you may answer. If you know.
I don't know.
Look at that red envelope in their hands. That's the envelope given out at Chinese New Year, correct?
It could be.
Right. And that's the traditional pose, right? When you're before your elders in Chinese culture.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a young man in a traditional pose getting the red envelope from his elders, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Object to the testifying, Your Honor."
Ms. Strofa said, it's a question.
The court said, you may answer.
You see exactly what you see, so you see two people sitting on a chair and another person kneeling.
And both people having red envelopes in their hand, right?
They do.
Right. How many years did you live in China?
5.
Would you say you have some familiarity with the Chinese culture?
Yes.
And could you tell me what that experience of yours with Chinese culture would lead you to conclude about this photograph?
The first thing I would say is respect.
Mr. Horton said, "Is there a question pending?"
Ms. Strofa said, well, her answer was the first, so I assumed she had a second point.
The court said, is there anything else you want to say?
The witness said, there isn't.
And you testified about this gentleman who is seated on his, I guess whatever posture that is. What is his American name, by the way?
Wayne.
Okay. And you testified that Wayne is dating Miss Sturgwa's daughter. Is that correct?
Right now, I don't know.
Well, when you were part of the employment circle, he was dating, according to you, Miss Sturgwa's daughter. Correct?
Yes.
And he did work for the company, correct?
For a period of time, yes.
He painted. Ms. Strofa said, you can take that down. Thank you. You testified that he painted, moved furniture, and did all kinds of handyman work, correct?
In 2018, yes.
Right. And what about in 2019?
He went back to school.
Right. And where did he go to school, do you know?
I don't remember.
Do you remember if it was Baruch College?
I don't remember.
Do you remember what he was studying?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, you may answer if you remember what he was studying.
I don't remember.
He was polite to you, correct?
He was.
He drove Mr. Gua around, correct?
Correct.
And when Mr. Gua was being driven around, is it fair to say that there would always be two cars?
No.
No? Could you describe for the jury what a car would look like in which he was being driven around?
There were several cars.
And each one of them had tinted glasses, correct?
Not each one.
Not each one. Okay. And when he was driven around, you said he had two teams, right? According to you. He had a Chinese security team and an American security team. That was your testimony?
Yes.
And it was your testimony that you really thought, in your opinion, that it was not a security team at all. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's start with the American team, okay? Do you know how many people were on the American team?
The number varied cause people were coming and going.
So you don't know.
It could be as little as 2, up to 6.
You don't know if there were ex-NYPD employees or not, correct?
I know.
You do know.
I do.
Okay. And how many were ex-NYPD employees?
All of them.
All of them were ex-NYPD employees, correct?
Yes.
Let's move to the Chinese team, as you called it. And you said he was closer to them, correct? According to you?
Yes.
That man is not fluent in English, right?
He became fluent.
Really? You think Mr. Gw't spoke English fluently in 2018?
Not in 2018.
How about 2019?
A lot better.
A lot better, right? And you're claiming under oath that he went from 2018 of not speaking English to fluency in 2019?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained.
He spoke to you, when he spoke to you in Mandarin, correct?
Yes.
He never spoke in English even though you are bilingual, correct?
He never spoke English to me.
Right. And when he spoke to his daughter, who also speaks English, he spoke in Mandarin, correct?
That's correct.
When he spoke to his wife, he spoke in Mandarin, correct?
Yes.
And when he got messages in English, he would come to you and play them and tell you to translate, correct?
Yes.
He did not know how to email, correct?
That I don't know.
Did you ever get a singular email from this man in all the time you worked for him?
No.
And when he spoke to people around him, he spoke in Chinese, right?
He spoke Chinese to Chinese people.
The reason you were hired as a translator is because he didn't speak English, correct?
In 2018, yes, correct.
And you continued to work, according to you, for him as a translator in 2019, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now you also testified, did you not, about a person called William J. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And you liked William J., right?
I did.
You had a good working relationship with him, right?
He was not around a lot, but whenever he was at the office, yes.
You liked talking to him, right?
Yes.
And he talked to you, correct?
Yes.
And he's the one who invited you to be on some board, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Gw't didn't invite you, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. J is the one who talked to you about what you would be doing on the board, correct?
Yes.
And you had a choice. You could have been on the board, correct?
Correct.
Or you could have told him and said, "Gee, I'm not interested," correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you decided that William J.'s offer sounded interesting to you, so you accepted and you were on the board, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. J didn't tell you what he wanted you to do on the board, correct?
He briefly mentioned investments, but nothing more than that.
Okay. And he didn't tell you anything about the investment, correct?
He did not.
He didn't tell you what type of investments they were, correct?
That's correct.
He didn't know if the investments were coming from Abu Dhabi, correct?
Not specifically, correct.
You didn't know if the investments were in the billions of dollars. According to you, you knew nothing. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection."
The court said, sustained.
Did you know if the investments were in the billions of dollars?
I do not.
And you decided you were going to be on the board anyway, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And William J. did email people, right? Unlike Mr. Gw't?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. William J. emailed about questions he had, right?
Mr. Horton said, "Object to form."
The court said, did he email you?
Possibly.
Well, you knew his email address, right?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't email him and ask him any questions about serving on this board, right?
No.
Okay. And you decided that you were going to go ahead and serve on the board, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the only reason you decided you didn't want to serve on the board is because that company got civilly sued, correct?
I was not aware of that at the time.
Right. But once you became aware, you were like, "I'm out," right?
I heard something, so I didn't have the details, but I heard, if you want to call them rumors.
Right. And when you heard, you wanted out, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And nobody stopped you, right, from leaving the board?
No one did.
Nobody said you have to stay on, correct?
That's correct.
Not Yvette, correct?
That's correct.
Not Gov't, right?
Right.
And certainly not William J., right?
That's correct.
Okay. You continued to work there, correct, at Golden Spring?
After.
Resigning from the board, you continued to work, right?
Yes.
Zero repercussions to stepping off from that board, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Now you testified that you had responsibility at the Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
I was president and treasurer.
I'm sorry?
I was president and treasurer of Rule of Law Society.
Okay. And what about Rule of Law Foundation? Or are you using them interchangeably?
No. That was a separate entity.
So let's talk about Rule of Law Foundation, okay? For them, did you take a trip to France?
Not so I took a trip to France, but not for Rule of Law Foundation.
And who did you take the trip for?
I took the trip because boss asked me to.
Mr. Gov't asked you to.
Correct.
And he didn't ask you alone, right? To take a trip?
I was not alone.
Right. There was an entire team that was put together, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And the team that was put together consisted of you, right? Because you spoke several languages. I'm assuming, correct?
I was one of them, yes.
Right. And who else was on that team, by the way?
There were 4 other people.
Okay.
4 other security guys.
For other security guys, is that how you would describe them?
That's what we called them.
That's what you called them, right?
4 colleagues.
Right. And these were all experienced ex-NYPD officers, correct?
They were ex-NYPD officers.
Did you know them to not be experienced NYPD officers?
I can't judge as to they are experienced or not.
Well, you talked to them, right? According to you on direct testimony?
I did.
Right. And they told you about their experience as NYPD officers, correct?
Sometimes.
Right. And they told you what they did when they were with the NYPD, correct?
They said some things.
Right. And they told you they were investigators with the NYPD, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I believe some of them were detectives. I don't remember their exact titles.
And these detectives accompanied you on the trip to France, correct?
We went together.
Right. And what was the trip to France for?
So in the summer, in July of 2018, a Chinese national died in France. Boss, Mr. Gov't, believed that it was not an accident. He believed that he may have been murdered. And so he asked us to go there and find out what happened.
And Mr. Gov't thought he had been murdered by the CCP, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you went on this investigative trip, correct?
Yes.
You, for detectives, and then you went to France and you met a lawyer in France, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. 401.
The court said you may answer.
I don't remember.
You don't remember the French lawyer?
I don't
Mr. Horton said, objection.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'm sorry. I didn't hear.
Mr. Horton said, objection. The question has been asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
And there was a whole investigation into the issue of whether this man was killed, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection to form.
The court said, could you step up, please?
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
Ms. Schrofa said, sorry about that, Your Honor. I'm having a little trouble today with the hearing, so I will apologize. I really am.
The court said, no need to apologize. Why are we in France?
Ms. Schrofa said, I think she can hear me. Thank you.
The court said, okay. So,
Ms. Schrofa said, I think we're in France because she says Rule of Law Foundation and Society didn't do any work. So I'm trying to show they did do work. They investigated the death of somebody they believed was killed by the CCP, so that the truth would be told to the world. That's why. And she took the trip. She translated on the trip. And I'm pretty sure, and Mr. Skirik can jump in, that the government is going to seek to introduce an entire video on the subject.
Mr. Skirik said, well, it's the Bannon video.
Mr. Horton said, So the problem with the argument, Your Honor, is that she didn't testify that this trip was done under the auspices of rule of law. That's the proposition that they want to establish, but it's not there. And everything about this trip, all of the details that we're hearing, are hearsay.
The court said, "Did you ask the question whether she went in connection with Rule of Law Foundation?"
Ms. Strofa said, "I asked her if I'm pretty sure I did, and I asked her who paid, and she said Miles Gwa paid. And anyway, it doesn't matter if it's Rule of Law Foundation or Miles Gwa paid. I'm not introducing any of it for whether this man was or was not murdered. I really do not care about this trip. There is no hearsay problem. And I'm not asking about any statements she made. I'm asking about what she actually did in France. That's so."
The court said, "If your claim is that the Rule of Law Foundation carried out work in France."
Ms. Strofa said, "Mr. Gwa also carried out work in France. Mr. Gwa had an interest in his capacity to show that what the CCP was doing worldwide was problematic. And Mr. Gwa worked towards that. It doesn't matter."
The court said, "So these are Mr. Gwa's good acts."
Ms. Strofa said, "No, not good. Not good. Good is immaterial. Sorry. Go ahead."
Mr. Skirik said, "Your Honor, the factual narrative is that this investigation precedes the founding of the Rule of Law Foundation. And it's the work that they started that they talked about during that launch video that the government introduced into evidence yesterday. And the defense ought to be able to argue that Mr. Gwa, using his own resources, using Golden Springs resources, began the work of the Rule of Law Foundation even before its founding. That's what this goes to. It's relevant to the origin story of the rule of law."
Mr. Horton said, "Your Honor, if I may. I am confused, and I think the jury might be too. I heard Ms. Schroff say at the beginning of the sidebar that this was a rule of law investigation, and that's what?"
Ms. Strofa said, "It was rule of law."
Mr. Horton said, "Excuse me, Ms. Schroff. I didn't interrupt you. I heard Ms. Schroff say at the beginning of the sidebar that this was a rule of law investigation, and then I just heard Mr. Skirik say it preceded the rule of law. It's confusing. The jury is going to be confused about why this testimony is being elicited. I think that's reason enough to not elicit it."
Ms. Strofa said, "Your Honor, that's the as he put it, predecessor. Predecessor steps to the formation of the Rule of Law Foundation. This is the first step."
The court said, "So once the Rule of Law Foundation was formed, did they do anything in connection with an investigation in France?"
Mr. Skirik said, "That is the subject of the Bannon video, which is launch, the announcement of the launch of the rule of law. It is a direct factual connection. They talk about it extensively in the Bannon video that the government put into evidence."
The court said, "But did they do anything?"
Ms. Strofa said, "They ran the investigation. And then they publicized what they believed happened as a result of their findings of the investigation. The
court said, "So you're saying after the founding of Rule of Law Foundation, there was work in connection with the French investigation? That's your representation?"
Ms. Strofa said, "That's not what I'm saying. I wouldn't call it the French investigation. What I'm saying is, this guy was murdered. Mr. Gwa took his own money, started this investigation. And as a result of the start of this investigation, it morphed into the establishing of the Rule of Law Foundation, which they claim in the indictment is part and parcel of the racketeering enterprise, which is an entity formed for no reason other than to fleece money. And what we're trying to show is, this is how it started, this is how rule of law got developed, and what else it did. It's a natural progression. And also it is because they are putting in the video of Mr. Bannon."
The court said, "Does Mr. Bannon say that the Rule of Law Foundation is undertaking work having to do with this investigation in France?"
Mr. Kamraju said, "Yes."
Mr. Skirik said, "Yes."
Mr. Kamraju said, "But also, Your Honor. The witness on direct testified about preparatory steps taken to start the rule of law. That's why they elicited it. When they had that discussion, in order to elicit her statement that Mr. Gwa supposedly said, 'We're going to need $100 million. So again, they already brought the preparation into it. This completes the narrative.
Mr. Horton said, first, her testimony was that she undertook this preparation in September. Consistent with the representation, one of the two representations that this event predated the rule of law. Not that it originally started that it was a rule of law investigation. But I think more fundamentally, that this is a fraud case and this is now coming in as he had this money before that he used on this investigation to do good works looking into a murder.
Ms. Strofa said, not good works.
Mr. Kamaraju said, I'm sorry. It's not a fraud case, it's a racketeering case, at their insistence. Your Honors already ruled on this. When Your Honor rejected their motion in limine to preclude the defense from talking about any of the positive activities of these organizations. Under RICO law, they have to prove continuity, and if the organization was a legitimate enterprise, then the test for continuity is different. So in any speaking of the law, the fact that these institutions had legitimate origin stories and had legitimate business afterward is directly relevant to the racketeering charges that the government chose to bring.
Ms. Strofa said, it's not to the...
Mr. Finkel said, may I respond, Your Honor? At most, there might be a question, which Ms. Schroff has already elicited, about whether she traveled to France for an activity, but what Ms. Schroff is endeavoring to do, it appears, is to get into the details of an investigation about a murder of someone who is completely irrelevant to anything alleged in the indictment. That happened in Europe. So I think we're very far afield of what the gravamen of this entire trial is about. And while there might be a probative purpose for activities that either predated or are part of the rule of law, which, by the way, this witness says it wasn't under the rule of law. But in any case, Your Honor, that's already been elicited, and it's time to move on. And that's our argument.
The court said, what more is it that you want to elicit?
Ms. Strofa said, I've actually completely lost track of the question. I don't remember the question anymore. I'm telling you very candidly. But again, what we're trying to show is the issue of the enterprise that the government charged. We do not care if this guy was murdered or not. Nobody cares. Right? And
Mr. Finkel said, so why ask the question?
Ms. Strofa said, because you have alleged, can you help me out here? I'm sorry.
Mr. Finkel said, if they want to ask, did you take a trip to France as part of the rule of law? Okay. But getting into the details of the investigation is completely far afield.
Mr. Kamaraju said, first of all, they've already introduced the details of the investigation, not us, them. They did it with the Steve Bannon video in evidence.
The court said, the Steve Bannon video, what is that going to say?
Mr. Kamaraju said, the Steve Bannon video, which is in evidence already, through a stipulation that they put in yesterday, says that Miles Gov't launched this investigation. As a result of that investigation, they are going to publicize the results of that investigation. They're going to go after financial institutions that enabled the CCP. And that is part of the mission of the Rule of Law Foundation. And that's why it's been started. And they can say it's not in evidence. They admitted it, Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, that's not our argument.
Mr. Kamaraju said, hold on. That's not the point. Whether it's your argument or not, we get to have an argument also. And our argument is that the Rule of Law Foundation is a legitimate enterprise that has a legitimate beginning. It has a legitimate purpose, it has legitimate operations. And if we can show that, Your Honor, then that changes their burden.
The court said, so what I want to understand though is, exactly what is it that you're trying to bring out right now?
Mr. Kamaraju said, Ms. Schroff, I think it's simply, Your Honor, I think it's simply this is a real endeavor. This witness went on a real endeavor, they went to conduct an investigation, it was real. It was funded by Mr. Gov't and the enterprise, that enterprise ultimately culminates in the Rule of Law Foundation. The work that is done prior becomes the work of the Rule of Law Foundation.
The court said so.
Ms. Schrofa said, "How about this, Your Honor? Maybe I can answer the question. Mr. Gov't funded this trip. Mr. Gov't funded the investigation. And this was the precursor to the establishing of the Rule of Law Foundation. How about those 3 questions?"
Mr. Finkel said, "She doesn't have any personal knowledge."
Ms. Schrofa said, "If she doesn't, then she can say no."
The court said, if she does not know, she can say no. They have a good faith basis to ask the question, and so I'm going to permit the question.
Mr. Horton said, "If I could just say one more thing, Your Honor."
The court said yes. One more thing.
Mr. Horton said, "I just want to clarify that the question is close to one, it's quite close to one that was asked and answered. Which is, was this done through the rule of law? So if there's a question that comes in that's close to asking her to try again on that, essentially, we will object to its asked and answered."
Mr. Kamaraju said, "This is not the same, though."
Ms. Schrofa said, "Really, we should stop sustaining asked and answered objections. It's not going to hurt the jury to hear about that, Your Honor."
The court said okay. All right. Let's go.
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said go ahead.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Mr. Gov't funded the trip, correct?
He did.
Okay. And after the trip was the start of the Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the Rule of Law Foundation was what we call colloquially an NGO, correct?
It was a non-profit organization.
Okay. And you at one point were part and parcel of Rule of Law Foundation's efforts, correct?
Rule of Law Society and Foundation, yes.
Okay. And as part of that responsibility, you were involved in the launch of Rule of Law. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. And there were several meetings that were held as to how the Rule of Law Foundation should be announced, correct?
Yes.
There were agendas drafted up, correct?
I don't remember that.
Okay. There were meetings, correct?
There were.
And people discussed what was the best way to bring this forward, right?
Yes.
And who was involved in those meetings, do you know?
Usually it was Boss, Steve Bannon, William whenever he was in New York, Yvette was there.
And who else was present?
I was there.
Were you there for all of the meetings?
Most of them.
Most of them. But there were some meetings to which you were simply not privy, correct?
If they had a meeting that I don't know about, then I don't know.
Right. But there were discussions about who would be in what meeting. And you were left out of some of the meetings, correct?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. And you talked about Steve Bannon being present at some of these meetings, right?
Yes.
Fair to say Mr. Bannon is a controversial figure, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said you may answer.
What do you mean by controversial?
You know what? Fair enough. Ms. Schrofa said, "I'll move on, Your Honor." Steve Bannon was part of these meetings, correct?
Yes.
Steve Bannon's position, at least on China, is pretty public, correct?
It is.
Right. And you understood Steve Bannon, regardless of all the other problems the man has. He was against the CCP, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
He claimed to be against CCP.
Right. And he was vocal about the fact that he was against the CCP, correct?
He shared his opinion.
Okay. And is it fair to say that did you not believe his opinion about the CCP?
I never said that.
No. I'm asking you. You sound like you disbelieved that he was anti-CCP. Do you believe he was anti-CCP?
I only know what he said, and he said he was against.
Okay. So you took him at face value that he was anti-CCP, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained.
And Mr. Bannon was part and parcel of these conversations as to how to launch the Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Yvette was part and parcel of this, correct?
Yes.
And part of the discussions was what projects Rule of Law Foundation would undertake, correct?
At the very beginning, no.
Okay. You tell me. What was discussed at the very beginning?
At the very beginning, so from July of 2018 to November of 2018. A lot of the discussion was around what happened in France and the alleged or possible involvement of the CCP in what happened.
Right. And then there were a lot of discussions about whether or not CCP was involved in the murder in France. But then it moved on and started the Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
This was in November.
Right.
Yes.
In November, there were discussions whether or not as to what the Rule of Law Foundation would have as its aims and its objectives, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the aims and objectives, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, was to help those who were the victims, so to speak, of the CCP, correct?
That's correct.
And everybody in that room agreed, right, that the CCP was a very separate entity than the People's Republic of China, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained. It's not clear that she can speak for what the group believed.
Okay. Well, you believed, did you not, that the CCP is very different from the people of China, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the goal was to help the people of China, right?
That's correct.
Right. And whether the people of China now lived in the United States or elsewhere, the goal was to help the dissidents as well, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And the goal was to make sure they felt supported, correct?
Yes.
And part of the support system would involve helping them with their asylum applications, correct?
Also.
Right. Helping them navigate when they couldn't speak the language, correct?
I don't remember this point specifically.
Okay. Well, you tell me. You were there. So you tell me what the goals and objectives were of the Rule of Law Foundation.
Everything you said is correct. So the goal and mission of Rule of Law Society and Foundation was to help Chinese people in various forms. It could be from a legal perspective to help they just needed, and it was also to educate the public on China.
Okay. And there were proposals made on how to educate people on what was going on in China, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And some of the proposals were accepted, and some of the proposals were rejected, correct?
All of them were rejected.
Well, all of yours were rejected.
Not mine specifically, but proposals that came in.
I'm sorry. Your testimony is that every proposal ever made for the Rule of Law Foundation was rejected?
While I was there, yes.
Okay. So there would be board meetings, correct?
There was one board meeting in January of 2020, yes.
Okay. You were part of that board meeting, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't take any notes of that board meeting, is that true?
No. Someone else did.
Someone else took minutes of that board meeting. You didn't take them, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And
The court said, we're going to stop here. It's 2:45. So members of the jury, remember that you're not allowed to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Don't permit anyone to discuss the case in your presence. Please return on time, as you have in the last couple of days, so that you can walk right through that door at 9:30 and we can get going on time. Have a good evening.
The law clerk said, "Jury exiting."
The court said, don't discuss your testimony.
Jury not present.
The court said, we will return tomorrow for the continuation of Ms. Maistrello's cross-examination. Is there anything before we break?
Mr. Kumraju said, "Not from us, Your Honor."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Nothing we can't take up in the morning, Your Honor."
The court said, all righty then. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
All counsel said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Adjourned to May 30th, 2024, at 9 a.m.